Hey, this is David, pastor of Hamilton Life, and I want to thank you for taking a listen to our podcast. For more information on our church and how you can support the ministry, you can visit us online at hamiltonlifechurch.com. Thanks again for taking a listen, and we hope you enjoy the podcast today.
Hey, good morning. So we're starting a brand new conversation today about the days of our week. Because here's what I've noticed, is that our faith is often rooted in things that are ambiguous or far, but there's nothing more spiritual than a Monday. Right? There's nothing more spiritual than a Tuesday. There's nothing more spiritual than a Wednesday, and on and on. See, what I've found is that spirituality, when disconnected from us, gets lost. But when we connect it to what we're living, our normal lives, our ordinary, mundane lives, you're extraordinary, but I'm mundane, we find that faith isn't apart from us, but it's a part of us. And so what I've noticed is that there is this beautiful history, thousands of years of meaning behind the days of our week. There is a biblical and a spiritual rhythm to the days of our lives, not the soap opera, but the days of our lives, our weeks. And so what I want us to do over the next 7 or so weeks is I want us to talk about our days. Because what I've found to be true in my life, and I'm pretty sure it's the same for you, is that you got up today like any other Sunday. And some of you did something you've never done before. You're here. Congrats. It's your first time, you have to fight. So we're happy you're here. You're here, first time, Monday. You're going to get up. And you're going to spend Monday like you normally spend Mondays. Tuesday and on and on. And see, I'm so tired of living my life ordinary and average, going through weeks and noticing a couple of weeks are up, and now we're into a new month, and noticing the next month is over, and as soon as we're into October, we're already into Christmas, and we're already into the new year, and we're back into summer, and I'm tired of us not harnessing the power of our days, getting the most out of what God has given us, so we lean into that. So this morning, with your permission, I would like to mess with your Sunday. Not just today, but I would like to mess with the rest of the Sundays of your year. I would like to mess with every Sunday for the remainder of your life. Do I have your permission? I don't want you to ever see Sunday the same way. I don't want you to ever feel Sunday the same way. I don't want you to ever wake up and hear the word Sunday in the same way and think the same things. We're going to be shook out of what has been normal to us, and we're going to step into what God has for us. So we talk about Sunday. The Romans, they named their days of the week. And what's so interesting about Sunday is they called it the Dies Solis, right? Or Day of the Sun. That Sunday was a day set aside, designated to celebrate the sun. Now, we didn't see the sun this morning. I'm sure we'll see it eventually again. But the idea is that they set the day aside to celebrate the sunshine, the God of the sun. And what happened was the Roman Empire, it turned Christian, and the Day of the Sun became, or Day of Solis became Dominica, which is the day of the Lord, or the Lord's Day. And I don't know how much time you've spent in church or what you've experienced before, but the Lord's Day is a sacred day. It's a day that we set aside to honor and to celebrate God, and you're here, so you get that. But it's the Lord's Day, and so throughout history, then, we've been setting aside Sunday as the Lord's Day, the day that we recognize God. But it's not just a day that we set aside to recognize God. That what God is inviting us into, and Sunday is a beautiful reminder that we need rest. Anybody need rest? One quick nap? We can get the lights just a little lower, and then you guys could just get like a 30, 40-minute nap. I can keep the tone down a bit. We could get the pad pulled back up. You could have some rest. Here's the idea, though, is that as a society, we're really terrible at resting. You're lousy at resting. I'm terrible at resting. We don't rest. It's been proven through many studies that this generation, the generation just slightly below mine, though I still accept it, the idea is, though, that your generation does not understand rest, that you are the most stressed out generation of all time. Now, before you get proud of that, you got to realize you're not hunting and gathering your food. You know what I mean? You're not out like walking for water. You're disappointed because the Wi-Fi is not fast enough. Like you were the most stressed out generation, and you have no reason to be. But here's the reality, is that for us, we have these enemies of rest in our lives, and it's called stress, anxiety, worry, and fear. You might call them work. You might call them friendships. You might call them school. You might call them your life. But we have enemies to our rest in our anxieties, in our fears, in our stresses, in our worries. And it's not, we can't rest because we've got so much to do. It's that there's so much happening up there in our minds that we cannot come to a place where we rest. Now, do you know that burnout has now become a legitimate medical diagnosis? That we are a society that doesn't understand the deep, practical, and spiritual importance of rest. That we don't understand rest because when we decide to take a day off, it's to catch up on other things. Our day off is to catch up on the yard work. Our day off is to catch up on friendship, or our day off to catch up on whatever we've been unable to do because we can't rest, that we are always working constantly. Even our vacations are work. I know because I spent the last week in Disney. Our vacations are our job. It's time. I had to come back to work to get a break, that here we are. We don't understand rest. And it's starting to take its toll on our lives because it's not how you and I were created. We weren't created to not need rest. Now, I realize if you were here last week, there was a man named AJ who spoke about work. Don't pay attention to that guy. Pay attention to this guy. I'm here. I pastor this church. He's just a guy. I listened to his message. It was absolutely fantastic. And he brought the hard work. You know what I mean? Like he brought the hard message of you got to work. I'm going to bring the good message of rest. That's how we play that. It's good and bad cop. The idea is that we work. And if you didn't hear his message, I implore you to go find the podcast and listen because it was really encouraging to do your job. But the only reason and the only way that we're able to do our job is if we adhere to rest. And the only way we can fully get everything that God intended for us out of a day of rest is if we're actually spending the rest of our time doing work. And so work and rest go hand in hand. That is, we've been labeled the most stressed out entire generation. I believe that God has something more for you and for me. I believe that he has something more for us. We understand medically the benefits of rest, good night's sleep, free from anxiety. We understand how it benefits our bodies. But spiritually, we don't understand that our souls are in deep need of rest, that our souls are weary. And you may not realize it. You may not recognize the signs and the symptoms. You know when you're getting a cold, right? I'm not, but maybe you are. You know when you're getting the flu. God forbid that season's coming. You know when something's coming on, when you start to feel it in your body. See, spiritually, I believe there are warning signs that we ignore when our souls start to desperately need rest. And so what God wants us to do is understand the deep spiritual principles of rest. That nap that you take, that Netflix show that you binge watched all weekend. You know what I mean? There's something very spiritual about the rest that God has placed in our lives. But what I want us to do in order for us to observe this spiritual principle of rest, I don't want you to be scared here if you're a regular, but I only have one point for you this morning. That's it. It's stop. If you want to observe the biblical and spiritual principles of rest, you must stop. Everybody say stop. Yeah, you know the word, but do we understand how to stop? I think stopping is probably the most difficult thing that we can do because a lot of us, we live with this mantra that says, I'll be happy when. I'll be happy when I get out of school. I'll be happy when I get that job. I'll be happy when I get that promotion. I'll be happy when I have this. I'll be happy when I meet the right person. I'll be happy when that right person treats me the way I think that should be treated. I'll be happy when. And what I've found to be true for human beings across the board is that every single one of us are pursuing what's next, and we don't understand what's right here in front of us. And I love hustle. And we'll talk about hustle in a little bit. And we'll talk about going after your dreams and chasing what God has put inside of your heart. And we'll talk about the work that's necessary for you to thrive and to survive and to fulfill God's purpose for your life. But what I want you to understand, before you understand any of that, is that in order to do what God's called you to do, you must understand what it means to stop. You have to understand what it means to rest. See, we don't understand that because we want to achieve more. And we live with this idea that if I do more, I am more. If I accomplish more, then I'll be seen as more. And I'm tired of living in a society with a generation that thinks we have to do more to be more. You are enough. You are enough. That God loves you unconditionally. And here's what's crazy is that he can't love you more. You might get that job or that car or that perfect spouse with the six-pack abs and the good hair. My wife got that. The idea though is that God won't love you more. He loves you the way you are. And that's really hard for us to stomach, isn't it? Because we live with this idea that if we keep accomplishing things, then we can earn God's love. We can earn the ability or the right to rest. We say, I'll rest when I'm dead. But if you live your life truly with that mantra that you'll rest when you're dead, you'll be dead before the rest of us. So let us know how that worked out for you. You cannot live that way. That our souls and our bodies were not designed to live that way. Anybody ever run downhill? Maybe as a kid or last week on downtown, you start running downhill. And there's nothing better than running downhill when you first start. Your brain says, I can do this, and you take off. And about halfway through, your brain starts saying, oh man, I can't do this. My feet don't move as fast as my head. And you start leaning, and all of a sudden you realize, I'm going to fall. I'm going to fall. I hope somebody's YouTubing this. I'm going to fall. And then you roll. See, I think our souls are doing the same thing. See, I think we're living faster than our souls can move. And a lot of us, we're moving so fast, our souls can't keep up, and we get to a place where we crash. And maybe you're here because you've crashed. Maybe you're here because you've been running and moving and doing, and you just can't go and run and do anymore, and you're like, maybe I'll try this Jesus thing. If so, I'm glad you did. Maybe you're here and you're still in that run, you're still mid-run, and you don't realize it yet, but you're headed for disaster. What I want you to do is I want you to stop. I want you to stop and to wait and to heed what God is doing. See, many of us, though, we live on this hedonic treadmill where we think we're going to be happy if we get stuff, and so we keep chasing our own tails. But God's intention for us is to be happy where we are, to understand that there is more, and he's going to bring us more in his time. But the greatest thing we can do right now is to understand God's here and he's with us, and that's enough. That is enough for us. And what's fascinating about the scriptures is in Genesis, we find that the creation of the universe is being formed. It's being spoken into existence. And in Genesis 2, chapter 2, it says, in the seventh day, God ended his work, which he had done. Which, by the way, if you're not familiar with God's work, he created the universe. So it was a pretty big deal. And he rested. And he rested on the seventh day from all of his work which he had done. In verse 3, then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. Now, I don't know what you do for a living, but until you've created in the universe, you can't say you're too busy to rest. If you're a mom, you're having kids, you get some credit because that's pretty cool. But the rest of us, we don't get to say we're too busy to rest. As long as God is out here creating the universe, never sleeping and taking care of us, and he still chooses to rest, then we have to understand the deep biblical and spiritual importance of rest. See, the word rest translated in Hebrew is the word Sabbath. Everybody say Sabbath. It's just a fun word. Sabbath. I love this word Sabbath because God Sabbathed from all his work that he stopped. He created the universe, spoke it all into existence, and then he Sabbathed. Not only did he Sabbath, but he blessed the seventh day as a day of rest. That he encourages us, that he invites us into this day of rest. Now, culturally, Christians, some observe this on Saturday, some observe this on Sunday. We have been observing this on Sundays since the long time. I know my whole life I've observed it. My dad was a pastor, and he would never let us go to lunch or shop on Sundays. We could never spend money because he didn't want to make other people work, but he worked. So I couldn't figure that out. The idea, though, is that we adhere to the seventh day. We adhere to the first day rather than the seventh, because Sunday is the first day of the week. We adhere to the first day of the week as a day of rest. Many observe on the seventh day, or they observe Saturday. But growing up, we did this. But in Matthew 12, what we find is that Jesus is in this unique and interesting situation. And he's there with his disciples, and they're walking, and it's the Sabbath, and they're hungry. Because that's what you do on Sundays. You eat, and Mondays and Tuesdays and throughout the week. The idea, though, is they're hungry. And they go through a grain field. And they're like, I'm hungry, there's food, let's eat. So they start picking the grain, and they start eating. And the Pharisees, they see them, and they call them out, because there's a law that says you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. And the disciples were working, and the Pharisees, they come up, and they're like, hey, you're breaking the law. This isn't right. They weren't concerned that these men were stealing the grain. They were concerned that they were harvesting it, that they were shucking, and they were working and preparing food. They were disappointed that they were working. And what's fascinating as you dig into this passage deeper is that the Pharisees weren't upset that these men were breaking the law. They were upset that they were breaking the Pharisees' interpretation of the law. And Jesus steps up. Anybody love when Jesus steps up for the rule breaker? I love it. I love when Jesus steps up for the people that are just breaking all the laws. Not the laws, but you know what I'm saying. In Matthew 12, Jesus speaks up. He says, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Isn't that huge? It doesn't say the Son of Man is in control of the Sabbath or he's in charge of the Sabbath. He says the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Don't you think that probably shut down any further conversation? It's like, all right, you win. Keep eating. He is the Lord of the Sabbath, and because he is Lord of the Sabbath, he did away with the legalism surrounding the Sabbath. I know we have churches, denominations that have started over what day of the week we rest. And Jesus is saying, I'm Lord of the Sabbath. There's no reason to fight over what day you rest. Observing of the Sabbath doesn't matter if you're Saturday or Sundays. I work on Sundays. So I take Fridays as my Sabbath. That's my Sabbath. I've chosen to set aside the legalism of this passage, and I've chosen to adhere to this important biblical principle of rest on a different day, because the world doesn't stop on Sundays anymore. And I'm thankful we have doctors and nurses and Mexican restaurants, and we have places that we can go on Sundays because the world doesn't stop. And it's not fair for us just to go, well, you work at a Mexican restaurant, we're really thankful for you, but you're disobeying God's law. No. We adhere to the law of rest and the principle of rest. But we pick a day that fits into the rhythm of our lives. But what's so important for us to understand is that Jesus is declaring himself Lord over the Sabbath. And because he is over the Sabbath, he is the Sabbath. That because he is Lord over the Sabbath, he is the Sabbath. That he is that source of deep rest that we need. It's not as much about Netflix and naps as it is about getting close to Jesus. Then I take a nap and I'm more tired when I wake up than I am before I went to bed. I'm really disappointed I wasted that 2 hours. I want to do something that fills my soul. That rest is not just about taking a break from your work, but it's about understanding that Jesus is the Sabbath. He is the complete rest that we need. And it's not that we need another break or another vacation. It's that we need to understand what we can receive when we align our lives with Jesus. And I believe that we have these built-in opportunities to observe the Sabbath. And this is one of them. That for many of you, this is your Sabbath. And what I love about the reality that we can spend part of our Sunday together is that we're not just getting together to sing some songs. And we're not just getting together so we can shake one another's hands and smile. We're not getting together so that we can look like we've fulfilled our spiritual and religious obligation and duty so that we can start the week feeling good about ourselves. We gather together so that we can remind one another that we need rest. That if you're here for any other reason than to receive rest, that I'm so thankful that you chose this place to allow God to reinvigorate your souls so that tomorrow you can go to work. But today we rest. Today we understand what can happen when we stop, that the Sabbath is a complete and total surrender of our lives. To understand what can take place when we stop trying to manufacture and control every detail and aspect of our lives and we allow God to take over. And I love that Sunday is this built-in reminder for us to just stop. So every Sunday for the rest of your life, I want you just to tell yourself, stop. Just remind yourself that there's only so much you can control in your life, and the more you try to manufacture and the more you try to control, the more weary you become, but it's when you surrender to God, you find that your soul comes more alive, that you are more reinvigorated and more alive, and when we understand what can come from a passion that fuels our life and a mission that's focused on Christ, then we realize that we don't have to be tired anymore. We don't have to carry around anxiety and worry and fear and stress, that we can walk into a room like this and we can say, I'm not in control, but God, you are. And I can lay all those things that I've been packing around that have been weighing me down all week, I can lay them down at God's feet, and I can walk out of this space, not yet, but we can walk out of this space having laid our burdens down at God's feet. And we do this every Sunday. See, what happens for me on Monday is Monday's the day to fight. I'll get to that next Sunday. And Tuesday we'll get to that too. I don't want to spoil the series. But the idea is that there are times for fighting. There are times for moving. There are times for working. And what happens every Monday is I wake up and I go, no, I got to pick all that stuff back up. I need that stress. I need that fear. I need that worry. That's my edge. That's what gives me the edge in what I do. So I pick it back up and I say, no, I got this. And then I carry it like this huge boulder as far as I can throughout the week. And then I come Sunday again and I'm just exhausted. See, what would it look like if we dropped all that at Jesus' feet and we didn't pick it back up? What if we trusted in God so much that we were able to wake tomorrow and know that God has your day in his sights, that he's in control? Like, what would that actually look like for us on a practical level to be able to lay down all of our burdens right here at God's feet and go, no, I don't have to pick that back up when I walk out of this space. That this day of Sabbath and rest was so important to God. Not only did God model this when he created the earth, but he actually built it into the 10 Commandments. In Exodus 20, it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You were to labor 6 days and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work. You, your sons, your daughters, your males, your female slaves, your livestock, or the foreigner who is within your gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days. He's reminding you of what God did in just 6 days. Then he rested on the seventh. Therefore, the day the Lord blessed the seventh Sabbath day, and he declared it holy. That this concept of rest isn't just like this thing that you might want to do, but it's actually built into the 10 Commandments. Now, I don't know what you know about the 10 Commandments, but don't murder's on there, right? And we don't do that, right? Nobody's done that. You're not supposed to lie. You're not supposed to cheat. Like, there's a lot of really big, important things built in. But rest is there too. That if we were to look at this in a really simplistic way, not murdering and resting are kind of in the same boat. Like, they're that important. So why do we struggle so much as a culture, as a society, as human beings with this idea of rest? That the reality is that the day of rest is not holy, but how you observe it is. You make that day holy by how you observe it and where you spend your time, your energy, your focus, your effort. The day itself is not holy, but how you adhere to it is. And so the scripture tells us right there, it says that the day, remember, it says there it is, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Not because it's holy. We remember it to keep it holy. He goes on to say, remember, that he's reminding us because he knew that generations later we'd have the iPhone and we'd have really cool cars that drive themselves, and we would think we were living in the future, though cars don't fly yet, so we're still waiting on that. But God knew. He knew that we would have so many distractions in our life that we would forget how important it is to rest. And so in the scriptures, as ancient as they may seem, he's reminding us to never forget your need for rest. To never forget that God is in control, that it's more than a Sunday afternoon nap, but it's deep contentment in our work. See, what's beautiful about why and how God could rest is that he created everything. And do you know what he said when he was done? It's good. It's good. See, I think the reason so many of us refuse to rest is because we never feel like what our life's work has created is good enough. We don't think we're good enough, so we have to keep doing more. The reason that God could rest is because he knew that everything he had done was good. What if you lived your life that way? That at the end of the week, you had worked your hardest and you gave it your best and you could walk out going, it's good. I did it. I accomplished what God had given me to accomplish, and I could find deep contentment in the work that I've done. But see, we deal with this self-loathing. We deal with this insecurity where we're always trying to prove ourselves to other people. And so we're constantly trying to present ourselves in such a way that we look like we're just tired and stressed out and working all the time. And we think that that's what makes people respect us. Isn't it funny that it wasn't just a few generations ago that we broadcast our idle time as a way for people to be envious of us? And now we say, well, I'm too busy. What happens so often is that when somebody that you know in your circle goes on vacation, you go, oh, I'm so sorry, did you lose your job? Like, I'm so sorry, do you not have anything else to do, so you gotta go on vacation? Like, is this something forced on you? Like, we feel bad for people when they rest. Oh, you didn't do anything? Well, I got some work I'd love to give you. You know what I mean? Like, I just wish I had a day where I could do that. Right? Like that's our mentality. That's our mindset. And a lot of us, we live with this idea that the more we do, the more we can accomplish and the better people are going to think we are. But the idea is that God has set us up within a context of our bodies, our DNA, to need rest, to need to stop, to need to pause, that we don't need to prove ourselves to anyone. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone, that you are enough. And so you can rest knowing that there's deep contentment in the work that you have done in your life, that it's not that we don't hustle, that rest is not laziness. Rest is not laziness. That AJ, he talked about this idea of work and doing your job, and I love it. But we can't do our job if we don't rest, and we can't rest and fully get everything we need out of rest if we don't do our job, that there's this rhythm in our lives. And that rhythm gets broke up when we refuse to rest or we refuse to work. That there's this natural rhythm that we are to adhere to. And in Exodus 20, verse 9, the scriptures say you were to labor 6 days and do your work. In the 10 Commandments, we're also commanded to work. But that's AJ's thing. Like, that's his deal. I'm just talking about rest. But you are commanded to work. And then you're to rest. That rest is not laziness. It's finding value in the work that you've done to the point where you can stop. But see, a lot of us, we think that the world won't keep moving if we don't keep working. I don't know if you watched Lost, but there was like that hatch and they had to keep pushing the buttons in. And I forget how it ended. It was probably good. But the idea was that a lot of us would keep pushing the buttons in our lives thinking if we don't push the buttons, it'll end. That if we don't keep working, if we don't keep hustling, if we stop or slow down, then it's all going to fall apart. Everything that we've created, everything we've ever done is going to fall apart. The problem is, and I know this firsthand, that if you keep going, eventually you'll be the one that falls apart. And so we rest. We understand what rest means, that we are reminded that our souls are weary and dried out, that our souls are tired and in deep need of something more. And we try to find that more in other places. We take more trips. Maybe we drink more. Maybe we watch more Netflix. We try to fill that void. We try to replenish our souls in other ways, only to be found more depleted. But what God has invited us to do is to find deep contentment in Him, to find deep rest in Him. And a big part of rest is understanding where to go to be replenished. To understand where to go to take your weary soul. So 2 weeks ago, we were at Disney, which is built on the surface of the sun, and we were there in the hottest month of the year, and we were walking with our families in minimal clothing and every wind and thing we could find, and by the end of the day, like the sun was just, you know, and we're there, and you just want some kind of relief. And what was so amazing about our trip is that we would be walking down, you know, whatever streets in Disney, and just sun was killing us, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like only Florida can do, it just starts raining. And we had ponchos, and everybody else kind of ducked out. We just threw our ponchos on and just kept on going, you know, because we Disney hard. And we're out there, and the rain is just, but you know what happened when it rained is it all of a sudden cooled off. Temperature dropped like, I don't know, felt like 50 degrees, but it was like 10 degrees, and all of a sudden the sun was covered up and the rain was just there, and it was like you could hear and see the sizzling on the streets because they were so hot, and the smoke was coming up because of all the heat, and you could just feel like the heat just melting away. See, I think we need some water in our lives. I think a lot of us, we've been out there and we've been hustling and we're dried out, we're hot, and we're tired, and we think the answer is more work. And we've tried that and it doesn't work, and yet we keep coming to this place where we're like, maybe I should work harder now. But have you ever tried to work harder when you were already working hard? You know? Or maybe you were doing something and you couldn't quite figure it out, and somebody came up and they're like, you should try harder. You know what I mean? Like, I'm giving it everything I have. I cannot give it any more. What if we actually stopped and took a break? And we allowed the Lord to replenish our souls. We found rest not in television or another nap or another trip, but we found rest in Christ and Christ alone. And in this passage in Matthew 11, verse 28, Jesus himself says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And I will give you rest. All of you, take up my yoke and learn from me, because I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for yourselves. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. In this passage specifically, the word rest translates into replenishment. It's that fresh lemonade for your soul. It's that replenishment that doesn't leave you wanting. It's that opportunity to align and to connect your soul with the one who created you, who understands who you are and what it is that you need. That so many of us, we keep running and running and running to so many other things, but what God is doing is he's imploring us to come to me. That this is an invitation to trust Jesus fully with our lives. Not partially, not in half, not just, I might try this thing and see how it goes, but to fully surrender, to trust that God knows what's best for your life, that God knows how to lead your life better than we know how to lead our lives, to come to him and fully allow him to take our worry and our stress and our anxiety and to replenish us with the rest that we need. So I don't know where you're at spiritually. I don't know where you're at practically. But what I do know is that the promise of the Sabbath is not just about finding rest, but it's about finding God. And if you're here and you haven't found God, that's your place to start. To align your life with him. To pray a prayer of salvation, to pray a prayer admitting that you can only control your life so much, but that you want to surrender yourself to the leading and the direction of one who understands our lives in a holistic way. And so our starting place is to understand what can happen when we don't align our lives with Christ. And so before we proceed, I want to give you that opportunity to say, I need Jesus. One of the things that we're very careful here is that we don't want to isolate you or make you feel uncomfortable or call you out in any way. But if you are here and you don't know Jesus, I want to give you that opportunity. So across the room, if you would just bow your head and close your eyes. And if you are here and you say, I don't know Jesus and I need Jesus. I need him to lead my life. Or maybe you're here and you follow Christ for some time and at some point you thought, I'm going to take control. And maybe you've walked away from him, but this morning you say, I want to realign my life with God. I just want you to put your hand up and back down. I just want to pray a prayer with you. I won't have you do anything that will make you uncomfortable. But is there anyone here that says, that's me, I need Jesus? Or just put your hand up, you can put it right back down. Anyone that says, that's me, I need Jesus. I need to know Jesus. So in this space, we understand that everyone in this room has either aligned their life with Christ, or maybe you're still vetting Jesus. You're still curious. I encourage you, keep searching, keep knocking, keep seeking God. Don't give up. If you'll just give him a small piece of your life, he'll take that and run with it. He'll do remarkably more. But for those of us in this space who understand and know Jesus, what I want us to do is I want us to spend the next minute or two laying down our stress, laying down our worry, laying down our fears and anxieties, laying down control. I want us to mentally work through practical examples of how this can work in our lives. What can I change? What can I do differently to make sure that I'm not ignoring this biblical principle of rest, that I'm not glossing over this 10 Commandment, that I'm not missing the beautiful benefits and opportunities that come from leaning on God. It's not laziness. That a call to rest is not a call to laziness, but it's a call to reprioritize our lives. So what do we need to change? How do we need to reorient our lives so that we spend every Sunday in rest? I want us to reflect for the next few minutes. Jessica's going to lead us in a song to remind us of our need to surrender, and then I'm going to come close in just a few minutes. But I want you just to take a few minutes, start a conversation with God, and let's come out with some practical things that we can actually change and do so that we stop spinning our wheels, so we stop coming to the end of our week worn out, exhausted, and tired, but that we can be reinvigorated this morning.